Hello and welcome to the Political Opinions podcast, where every opinion is given equal footing and political tolerance and debate are given their proper attention in a world where both are on the decline. Today's episode will go over the different opinions for and against impeaching Donald Trump for a second time. On January 13th, 2021, Donald Trump became the first US president in history to be impeached for a second time, following his alleged role in inciting the protests in and around the US Capitol building the week before. Democrats have pushed for his impeachment, arguing he cannot be allowed to stay in office, and some Republican congressmen, and it's expected some Republican senators, will join them in both impeaching and convicting Trump. There are those, however, who believe impeaching and convicting Donald Trump is either wrong or will not provide the benefits it advocates for, and as such oppose it. Now, there are two stages to this process. First is the impeachment process, whereby the House of Representatives votes to impeach a sitting president, and then following this there is a Senate trial, whereby, if convicted with 2/3 of the Senate voting in favour, the president is removed from office, banned from running for future public office again, and has their post-presidential benefits removed, for example, their pension and their Secret Service protection. For convenience and time, I will refer to the entire process as impeachment, as both stages aim to achieve the same outcome. Quick reminder that the aim of this episode is not to try and argue for or against one side of the debate, but rather to highlight the different opinions on the topic and provide a comparison between them. I will begin with the arguments in favour of impeachment, followed by the arguments opposed, with a comparison at the end. The first argument in favour of impeachment is that Trump was responsible for causing the protests at the Capitol building on January 6th. This involved protesters breaking into the Capitol building, harassing and attacking police, and trying to break into the Senate and House chambers. 5 people died and many more were injured. Earlier in that day, Trump at a rally had called for people to march upon the Capitol building and protest against the rigged election. And as such, some have said that he promoted and caused the riot, and as such violated his responsibility as president to defend the US and its constitution, and as such should be removed from office, with some even going so far as to call this a failed coup, and as such believe action must be taken to punish the perpetrator, who in their view is Trump. Another argument is that Trump is simply too dangerous to be left in office at all. This argument no longer really stands due to Vice President Mike Pence's refusal to invoke the 25th Amendment, which allows the President's cabinet to declare them unfit for office and vote to remove them. Anyway, Pence refused, but prior there were calls from individuals such as House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to remove Trump from office, out of fears he may try something to do with Biden's inauguration, and fear that he may act in a way that causes further violence and could even cause deaths. Some also believe that Trump should be banned from running again in future. This election has caused perhaps the most divisive period of civil unrest in America, and as long as Trump can run for president, there will always be the risk of future problems if, for example, he ran again in 2024. This could pose an increased level of division in America caused by increased partisan division that has been seen since Trump became president. Some believe that with Trump permanently gone from office, then he will be unable to hold impact in the future, and that most of his loyal supporters and those undertaking his protests and riots may be quelled into accepting their president's defeat. Some believe that Trump has also violated his right to post-presidential privileges due to his actions. These people believe only presidents who have done their job properly deserve the benefits leaving the role ascertains. However, because of alleged disregard for American democracy and the actions that Trump has undertaken over the last few years, there are those who believe he has voided his right to receive these. Some also argue that impeachment is necessary to harm Trump's legacy and prevent him from becoming a martyr. It is often how a political individual leaves office which best defines them. If we look at President Bush and Prime Minister Tony Blair and the Iraq War, Richard Nixon and the Watergate scandal, Margaret Thatcher and the poll tax, and now Trump and his actions in the build-up and reaction to the results of the 2020 presidential election. Some argue this impeachment is important to some as a final declaration of US democracy's strength against a president that they believe has tried to replace and subvert it with his own populism. And finally, many Democrats have pointed to the rise in Republican support for their actions as proof that Donald Trump has gone too far. When Trump was initially impeached on December 18, 2019, not a single Republican in the Senate or House voted against him. However, in the House vote earlier this week, 10 Republicans, including the third most powerful Republican representative, voted to impeach Trump. And there are rumours that even the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, the most powerful Republican in Congress, has suggested he may vote to convict Donald Trump. And to some, this is proof that this impeachment is not a partisan action, but a genuine act of reprisal for what the president has done. Moving on now to the arguments opposed to impeachment. Firstly, there are those who believe that Trump was not responsible for the riots in the Capitol, and instead insist they occurred due to people's distrust in the US state. Be it that the protests are legitimate or not, some argue Trump wasn't responsible. Some point to his persistent calls for peace and telling his supporters to go home in multiple videos and Twitter addresses to them as proof that he did not wish for these riots. And instead, some claim that they were the actions of extremists independent of Trump, although they may support him, they are synonymous with a wider movement opposed to the current US democratic institutions, and as such, they believe that Trump is being used as a scapegoat rather than the real culprit to blame. There are those who believe that the impeachment process is a waste of time. Trump will have left office by the time the Senate reconvenes to begin his trial. And, therefore, all that this will serve to do is be counterproductive to Biden's first days in the Oval Office. The Democrats now have a working majority in the Senate, which will be beneficial to helping Biden pass legislation in his first 100 days. However, to convict a president, you need a 2/3 majority, which is something that the Democrats do not have. As such, some believe that impeaching Trump is merely going to act as a distraction for the Democrat-controlled Senate to help Biden in his first days, and will not achieve the desired result on the basis that Trump will already have left office. Some also argue that the aim to ban Trump from running again is a move that is either desperate or aimed at shutting down a political opponent. This stems into a distrust of what some call a corrupt, institutionalized political system, which aims to remove those, such as Trump, who work against it. Some argue that Trump was a good president and should be allowed to run again, and others, who even may believe that he was a bad president, have argued that the actions to prevent him from running again are not punishment for what he has done, but rather a means of the political system to go and have essentially a one-up against one of the people who stands against them. And finally, there are some who have even gone so far as to suggest that blocking him from running again is the final step in covering up a rigged election, as by preventing him from running again, they can ensure that the people in office are the ones who will oversee any insights into this and thus declare it to be legitimate, when in some people's view it isn't. Those who believe that Trump is being unfairly targeted by the current institutions also believe that his essentially removal of presidential privileges, if he were to be convicted, is simply a political act to essentially pose a risk to him, in some people's views, due to the lack of Secret Service protection, as well as be another essentially stab in the back against Donald Trump once he has left office, and as a means of asserting dominance of a, in these people's view, corrupt political system. Some people also believe that impeaching Trump will not harm his legacy, but will rather make him a martyr. Those who still support Trump do so despite most of society and most of the political bodies in America turning against him. Even his own Vice President Mike Pence has started to disagree with Trump in recent days, and as such, by impeaching Donald Trump, they will not achieve anything more than they already have, but rather all they will achieve in doing is making Trump a martyr amongst his most loyal and continuous supporters. And this can be counterproductive, as it may push them to act more radically than they already have, and could stand to cause more violence and division. They plan to remove Trump from politics by preventing him from running again and harming his legacy, but by making him a martyr, they may make him persist for far longer. And then finally, some argue that the Republicans turning on Trump does not prove anything. Some view it as a Republican purge of Trumpism in order to try and regain electoral ground that they have lost in recent elections, and that this is nothing more than a political move which only serves the self-interest of Republican politicians. Furthermore, some believe that these may be actions to try and replace Trump as the head of this movement that he is currently the head of, and as such they are voting against him not out of a disregard for him, but rather out of their own self-benefit. Essentially, some view this argument as that when the Republicans and Trump held most power, for example in the first time he was impeached, they all supported him, but now he is losing power, they have turned, and to some this is proof of political treachery rather than a true support of democracy and the law. Moving on now to a comparison. On the question of was Trump responsible for the Capitol riots? Well, those in favour of impeachment believe Trump was responsible for inciting the riots that occurred at the Capitol building, and as such there are grounds to impeach him on the basis that he attacked the heart of US democracy and violated his role as president. On the other side, however, they believe that Trump was not responsible, and that people are essentially using Trump as a scapegoat instead of blaming those who acted of their own accord, and that this is being used as the Democrats as a final excuse to try and remove him from power and harm his future legacy. On the question of should Trump be removed before Biden's inauguration, those in favour of impeaching him support it on the basis that they believe Trump could still do something bad before he leaves office, and he poses a threat to the stability of Biden's inauguration and a peaceful transition of power, and as such he cannot stay in the Oval Office any longer. Those on the other side, however, believe it is a waste of time, on the basis that Trump will not be removed for impeachment by the time Biden takes office, and that this is counterproductive, as it's essentially going to distract the Senate from helping Biden in their first days, and it's even worse now that they have a working majority, which will not be beneficial in a conviction. On the question of should Trump be allowed to run in future, those supporting impeachment believe Trump should not be allowed to run for office in the future, on the basis that doing so will allow division and conflict to continue to exist within America for many more years, and so removing him is beneficial to everyone. Those on the other side, however, believe that Trump will still be a political entity and have political presence regardless of if he can run away. Or if he can run again, rather. He will not vanish from political life, and some have gone so far as to claim that this is a political act by the Democrats to try and finally cover up their illegitimate election once and for all. On the question of should Trump have his presidential privileges removed, those in favour believe that as Trump has violated the terms and responsibilities of his position as president, he should no longer be subject to the benefit that the role ensues. However, the opposition to this believes that he has not been responsible for a lot of the actions his supporters have undertaken, and that he has done a good job as president, and as such, just because the Democrats disagree with the way he has acted, doesn't mean he should lose his post-presidential privileges, and this is essentially an act of revenge and nothing more. On the question of removing Trump and his legacy, those in favour of impeachment believe removing Trump will, for them, finally solidify his legacy as a bad president, and will ensure that he will not be remembered positively in the future, and that this is a final declaration of the US democracy's opposition to him and their own strength. However, those on the other side believe that this will be counterproductive, as it will turn Trump into a martyr for his supporters, and it will not harm his legacy, given that the only people still supporting him, on the basis that they still support him after all he has done, implies that just because he has been impeached, his support will not decline, and he will not be viewed any differently than he already is by most people. On the question of is Republican support proof of what Donald Trump has done to be bad, those supporting impeachment believe that given Republicans have turned against him, that this is proof that Trump's actions and the impeachment process against him are no longer partisan, but rather the impeachment process is a proper response to Trump's attacks on democracy and violations of his constitutional role. Those opposing impeachment, however, believe that these Republicans are merely acting in their own self-interest and are trying to remove Trump to either replace him with a different leader for this group of voters or distance themselves from him to show that they believe that what he has done to be wrong in order to gain electoral success in the future, and that some of them are even traitors. And then finally, is this move political or legitimate? Those supporting impeachment believe that this is a legitimate action and is not a political one, as it is done to prove that no one, not even the president, is above the law and they must be held accountable for their actions. Those on the other side, however, believe that Trump himself has done nothing wrong and that these actions are a means to try and remove him from office and essentially allow the Democrats to gain one last up yours to the president who they have been fighting with for the last 4 years. Overall, those supporting impeachment believe that Trump should be punished for what he has done, and that he should not have any form of positive legacy, and that these actions against him are necessary to show that democracy will stand up to any leader, no matter what they do and what they say. However, those opposing it believe that it is the wrong approach, and that either they should let Trump go quietly and not make it a bigger problem as it could be counterproductive, or that this is a part of an act by a corrupt government trying to get a final win over a president they have disagreed with so much. It remains to be seen whether Trump will or will not be convicted by the Senate once they reassume sitting next week. It currently seems unlikely, but not impossible, and merely depends on how many Republicans will be pushed to vote against Trump. And I personally believe that a lot of this will depend upon how peaceful Biden's inauguration turns out to be. If, for example, there is lots of violence and many protests, it may push some to vote to impeach Trump and convict him. However, if the day is peaceful and is not bad, then it is likely he will not be convicted. What is not in doubt, however, is that for many, the extremely uncivilized and chaotic end of Trump's administration will be his most defining legacy. Ultimately, though, what do you think? Anything that I missed or got wrong or could do better? Let me know in the comments on YouTube or on Twitter, and be sure to check back on Monday for another episode, which will most likely be on if the media should be allowed to censor people through private corporations. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you all soon.